Today is rounding decimals. So why do we round numbers? There's some reasons we might round numbers. We might want to estimate, or we might just want to make our decimals shorter and easier to read. That's usually why we're doing it, just because we don't want to have to write down this number over and over. So first, how do we round numbers? So let's talk about rounding up versus rounding down. So first you determine the number of decimal places to keep, and then you look at the place after the one you're rounding. If the number after the one you're keeping is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're going round down. That means you cut off all the decimal places after the one you're keeping. If it is 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, you will round up. That means you add 1 to the decimal place you're keeping and drop all the decimal places after that one. So for this example, we have this number 15.28531, and we want to round to different decimal places. So let's round it first to one decimal place. So I start by writing down my number that I want to round. I want to round to one decimal place. That means I want to keep this 2. So when I'm done, that's the decimal place I want to keep. Then I look at the number after it. 8 falls into the second category of rounding up. So if I round up, that means I'm going to take this 2 and round it up to 0.3. What this means is 15.2853 is closer to 15.3 than it was to 15.2. My next one, 15.28531. Basically, I have to choose, do I want to write 15.28 or 15.29? So this would be rounding down, this would be rounding up. So we always basically have two choices, and we're just trying to decide, is this closer to this one or to this one? So we want 2 decimal places, so we're keeping this place right here. So we'll look at the 5. 5 also falls into the round up category. So this would be 15.29. We rounded up. For 3 decimal places, we know we need to keep this place, so we look at the number next to it. 3 is a small number, so we round down. That means we just keep it at the 3. So 15.285. Sorry, we keep it at the 5. And finally, 4 decimal places. So 4 decimal places means we need to keep this, so we look at the next one. A 1 is small, that means round down, so keep our number. So 2, 8, 5, 3. So that's how we would round to different decimal places. What if we want to round a negative number? Let's see what happens. So negative 0.0934. So if I want to do it to one decimal place, I know I need this place, so I look at the 9. 9 is a big number, which means round up. So instead of this being a 0, we'll write negative 0.10. But we only need one decimal place, so we don't have to do the 0. So we went from basically like 0.09 to 0.10. 2 decimal places, negative 0.0934. So we want to keep this place, so we look at a 3. A 3 means round down, so just keep it negative 0.09. And 3 decimal places, we look at the 3. 4 is small, so round down, so negative 0.093. So this next part, I want you to pause and try all of these yourself. So as we go through the class, sometimes I'll say try it yourself. Make sure you pause the video, try yourself. So ready, set, pause. Okay, so let's see if you got the same numbers as me. Negative 3.25, 0.25, negative 0.659. This 0.099, this 9 gets rounded up to be 10 basically, so 0.10. The last one, 4, if you really wanted 2 decimal places, you just do 0.00. That's how you get the 2 decimal places. So in our class, what we care about more than really rounding is how many decimals do you keep? This is a question I get all the time in all of my different statistics classes. So how do we decide? The more decimal places we keep, the more accurate our answer is. But humans don't really like looking at long decimals. Our brains don't really like it. We prefer cutting it off at 2 to 4 decimal places. So many scientists use a concept called significant figures. That's more advanced than we need in this class. So sometimes our context will help us determine how many decimal places. Like if you're talking about money, you would use 2 decimal places. That's what we always do for money. But if you're talking about the number of people, we'd probably use 0 decimal places, or in other words, just whole numbers. So sometimes what you're talking about will determine how much you round. You can also use a similar level of accuracy as your original problem. So like if the information given to me is rounded to 1 decimal place, I would probably round my final answer to 1 or 2 decimal places. I'd keep it fairly similar. In general, though, we have some general rules. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to do this every time. Like I said, if I was up here, I might, if everything was 1 decimal place, I'd probably keep my answers 1 decimal place. Or if I was talking about people, I'd probably do whole numbers. But in general, while you're doing your calculations, keep 4 decimal places. And for your final answer, keep 2 decimal places. So I like 2 decimal places. It just looks fairly neat to me. That's my final answer. But let's talk about why you want to do 4 decimal places while you're actually doing your work. So let's look at this example. When you're performing your actual calculations, it's important to use at least 4 decimal places. So let's look at what happens to my final answer when I change level of rounding in my second step. So in this problem, I want to calculate this big looking thing. Now I wanted to simplify it to put in my calculator, so I put everything on the top into my calculator and I got 22.616. And if I put everything on the bottom in my calculator, I get 0.1365. That's what I get without rounding, but if I did try to round at this step, I could get different answers. So with my calculator spit out 22.616, but I wrote 23, and instead of 0.1365, I wrote 0, and I try and put this in my calculator. Well, you might notice something interesting. If I type into my calculator 23 divided by 0, it gives me a math error. Or it might say undefined or something else depending on what kind of calculator you have. So that's why at 0 decimal places, 23 divided by 0, I can't even figure out that answer. That's not something we can do. In math, we can't divide by 0. Well, what if I tried to 1 decimal place? So I did 22.6 over 0.1. I'd get 226. If I rounded to 2 decimal places, 22.62 over 0.14, I get 161. Notice this is a huge difference in our answers. So rounding between 0.1 and 0.14, when you're dividing, that makes a huge difference. At 3 decimal places, I get 165, so we're getting a little bit closer. And 4 decimal places, 165.68. So notice my answers changed a lot based on how I rounded. So this is why, to be accurate, we want to always go with at least 4 decimal places when we're doing our middle calculations. So 165.6849. So for accuracy, do all of your work with 4 decimal places, then round your final answer to 2 decimal places. So we had 165.6849 and we want 2 decimal places. So that would be here. We look at 4. 4 means round down. So 165.68 is my final answer.